Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Hello, everybody. Happy Wednesday. Welcome to Office Hours here with MoGraph Mentor. Hope you're having a good week. As usual, hanging out here on a beautiful Wednesday afternoon. Going to be doing this each week. This week, talking about 3D production. I've been interacting with a lot of students, a lot of individuals in MoGraph Mentor who are doing 2D work, and they want to get into 3D and they want to understand it a little bit more. And so I put together some slides and a little bit of a framework to think about 3D production if you're totally new to it, how you can make a little bit more sense of it. But as usual, hanging out here on a Wednesday. If you have any questions about MoGraph Mentor or about our mentorships, our training, anything like that, go ahead and post it in the chat, and we can hang out and chat a little bit about that as well. So I'm going to jump in here. So in terms of the stages of production, if you're totally new to it, I would just start with 4 different things. The 4 stages of production. Number 1 is idea. And this is obviously, across 2D or 3D, there needs to be some kind of subject matter, some kind of prompt, some kind of vision, something that informs where you're headed. There really needs to be an idea. And it really does matter in 3D that you have some kind of distilled idea or vision, because especially in 3D where you need to create everything from scratch in the viewport, if you don't have an idea and you're just going in and moving things around, without enough experience, it's hard to come up with anything that's particularly good or compelling. So having some kind of clear idea is definitely a good idea. And that can be, a prompt or just even a broad vision, but there's got to be something there. The second stage of production is planning. This can mean storyboarding. If you are especially doing something where you're building everything from scratch, and it's narrative and you're trying to tell a story, well, like anything else, whether 2D or 3D, you're going to need some pre-production and some storyboarding. Resourcing, right? Maybe there's elements you need to go out and get. You need to go out and get models, rigs, whatever it is. And then file prep in 3D. Let's say you're working on a 3D shoe commercial and the client gives you a CAD file. There's often a process of needing to convert files, transfer files over, prepare things to be ready for an animation production workflow if you're going to be working in Cinema 4D. And so there's often a step of planning there. The third step is really the fun part, and the part everybody really wants to do is just production, spending time inside of Cinema 4D, working on models, working on animation, placing lights, looking in your live view render port, seeing how things look, playing with all the details, the material, the texturing, all that really, really fun production stuff when you're inside of Cinema 4D. And then the fourth step is post-production, right? Now that you've rendered out images or, really photographs out of Cinema 4D, it's very common to add compositing effects, things like particles, lens flares, all that kind of good stuff. Roj, what's up, man? Thanks for being here during the live stream. There's also, in post-production, the issues of retiming and editing. And, a good example of this would be actually one of the pieces of training we have on mographmentor.com with Twisted Poly, where he's rendering out his image sequences out of Cinema 4D, and he's bringing it into After Effects to look at the kind of value scopes, the color scopes, his exposure. He's adding contrast, he's adding a bit of color grading, but he's also retiming the clips. He's ramping up the speed of one clip to try to massage the edit and just create an overall better film. So the retiming and editing piece, once you have your image sequences rendered, is certainly a big part of post-production. Color grading, and then formatting, right? Really using After Effects or Media Encoder, wherever you're headed next, to end up with something that is fully rendered. In 3D, we also, as you're getting more advanced and you want to do more advanced compositing, multi-pass rendering is really the way that that's done, rendering out the color channel, the ambient occlusion, the Z depth channel, all on basically individual image sequences, which can be recompiled inside of After Effects or Nuke or a compositor of your choice to create the final image. So especially if you're working in 32 bits, you can have a lot of flexibility in post-production to create even better looking images, play with the exposure, play with the contrast, all that good stuff. So when I'm talking to primarily 2D people and they want to get into 3D, originally one of, I think, the big framework confusion areas is kind of where does it all come from, and also what do I need to learn if I'm totally new to it. And there's really two ways that things get produced. Number one, you make everything. You've got to model every detail, deform every piece of geometry. You're going to make everything that we see, or it can be sourced, right? Let's say you're just going to go out and get a CAD file of a bike frame, which, again, going back to this example, is exactly what Nate's did, Twisted Poly did in his film, is going and sourcing CAD files for the tires, for the bike parts, all that kind of thing. So, there's really those two kinds of production where you're making everything. That's kind of one approach. Another approach is just to source a lot of stuff. Go out and get models, get rigs, get textures, get assets, grass fields, plants, all these different things. And you see a lot of really prolific 3D artists constantly publishing really nice looking work, but they're not really making everything in the scene, right? They're just taking existing assets, putting it in the scene, turning the lights on, deciding how to photograph it and bringing everything together, more like how a graphic designer brings together shapes and typography and photographs and existing assets to create nice looking compositions. So especially when you're doing photoreal 3D production, most stuff is sourced, right? It's not very common that people are going to model every single thing you see. If it needs to be photoreal and it's some kind of more advanced mesh that most people don't have the skill sets to actually create themselves. So that is another big area where if you're totally new, kind of understanding the two sides of that coin. Now, if you're going, and actually before I even totally jump into this one, it's a good example. Somebody like Paul McMahon, who goes by the Rusted Pixel. If you look at his portfolio, everything in here is made by Paul, right? He's not going out and sourcing existing models. He's just actually art directing and modeling and creating everything that we see. Now, that's very different from, an artist like Jesus Suarez, who, might be working with existing stuff, right? He's not spending the time to model a classic Eames chair, or to create a stylistic lamp from scratch or a rug. Like these are artists who are pulling together various elements, because when you're doing photoreal stuff, it's extremely difficult to create a very, very photoreal mesh. And directors like Tom Crate as well, you can kind of see some of the films, they're creating stuff from scratch. Other times it's taking terrain data and using, different kind of earth creation plugins and applications to create the geometry. And then, studios like Yeti, Tony, and Thanos, they're somewhere in between. You could tell they're doing some original modeling and art direction. And then sometimes, their work just depends on existing really, really high poly mesh. Like this 3D stuff here with the food, I doubt they modeled everything that we're seeing in the scene. So you're just actually kind of sourcing it. But it does help frame that if you're going to be the kind of 3D artist where you're making everything, then you have to do visual development, right? You are going to have more of a vision to get a good result. So like what Paul is doing with his work, where he's creating everything that we see, he's creating these little worlds, he has to do a little bit more pre-production than someone who's just sourcing, a bike frame and shooting particles at it per se. So when you are deciding that you're going to do 3D production and you're going to make everything yourself, you do need to lean on visual development, which comes into questions of illustration and character design and shape language. and all these other things that you kind of get for free when you're just sourcing other people's elements. And so when you are doing that visual development, there's often more storyboarding, more looking at reference, more character design, turnarounds. If you're going to create a character from scratch, that's a very demanding process to do that. And then maybe even, when you're producing stuff from scratch, doing things like lighting charts and color keys, where you're actually going to paint little color keys and think about the colors and the ideas, light sources, all that kind of stuff. So in my little sketch here, in my little illustration, if I wanted to create this cute little apple juice box scene as like a nightclub for apples, it would require quite a bit of, pre-production. And so here I'm thinking about, maybe I'll shoot it with an f4 lens at a 60 shutter rate, thinking about the field of view, thinking about the shot and the elements that would need to be constructed or crafted. And so on the flip side, if you're just sourcing most elements, you can be more experimental, which is very interesting, right? You can, and I've really come to learn this from artists like Nate's Twisted Poly, who just does a very nice job of, basically kind of setting up their Cinema 4D scene. And if I can just quickly jump back, let's see if we have a good example. Right, like he's just bringing a bunch of stuff into Cinema 4D, and then he's got his camera and he's looking for angles that he likes, and he's looking, shallow depth of field. What about the background? What about the placement of the shadows? Using turbulence FD and X particles to create simulations. And so I actually sketched up a little mock version of his bike frame shot where he's using I believe an X particle simulation, or maybe it was a turbulence FD simulation with these little red high resolution texture particles. Dwayne, thanks, man. I do appreciate it. Thanks for the nice comment there. So when you're doing the experimental stuff, when you're just bringing in other people's elements, it's kind of powerful too, right? I'm not saying it's in any way a lesser form of production to not model and make everything. In fact, guys like Nate's, let's see, he can produce a lot of stuff really quickly because he is just kind of bringing stuff in, doing a lot of simulation-driven work, set up the simulation, whether it's the plants growing, he's using the Forester plugin to have these plants grow on the surface of these metal objects that he sourced from GrabCAD. So it's you bring this in, use Forester, and then he's just looking for camera angles, right? He's got a shallow depth of field and he's trying to create beautiful images. Then he'll, line up a plant in the background right where he likes his camera angle. And so his process is really experimental. He's not storyboarding, right? He's not sitting down and trying to draw out the camera angles of his 3D film. So there are really different types of 3D production. There is the visual development, make everything from scratch, and then there's more of a photoreal approach that is often more experimental, and you can get really interesting results, right? Really beautiful results, and just kind of look for the best angles there. And there's fundamentally different use cases for these types of 3D, right? Photoreal 3D is meant to exist because, it's cheaper to create this stuff in 3D than to photograph it with a real camera. So the point of photoreal, which you see a lot in advertising and film, visual effects, is just to get things on camera that it's just cheaper to do in 3D than it would be to actually create it in the real world and actually try to photograph it. So in that sense, you just want to go grab really high poly, car models and phone models, and you're not going to really be modeling all those things. And in my studio experiences, most 3D production artists are not modeling specialists, and a lot of times you're just receiving elements and assets from the brands, from the companies, as starting points. And in the instances where I would be in a studio and they would need someone to really create, let's say, a 3D shoe, they would hire a kind of hyper specialist hard surface modeler to create that shoe model and then give it back to the more regular generalist 3D production artist who's going to craft the scene and maybe put some rigging in the shoe and maybe rig up the laces and do that aspect of it. And so you could see that in Jesus' work, certainly in Tom's work as well. If he's using various cloth materials, and that's the other part of it, right? Like, he's not interested in learning how to create a hyper realistic cloth material. It's more important that he's just thinking about the direction and the lighting and the scene a bit more generally. And then, this more visual development driven thing is it's very design driven when you're going to create everything. And oftentimes you see people default towards simple, iconic, let's say cute, just more iconic looking design, because of course creating really complex high polygon models and using just so many polygons from scratch, it takes so long to create realistic models that there's a simpler, softer version of 3D that you see in advertising too, that requires more modeling expertise, more design expertise, and then certainly more pre-production. So again, if you're totally new to 3D, these 4 basic stages of production are basically what you need to know, right? Like having some distilled concept, some distilled idea, some kind of planning phase, and then the actual production and post-production is what that looks like. But within that, there's really quite a division across the type of 3D that you're doing. So it's important at the beginning of the process to understand what it is you're trying to make. If you're trying to make things that are very designed and very art directed, like let's say Rusted Pixels portfolio, or if you're going for hyper real, it's a Honda Civic ad, so it has to look exactly like a Honda Civic, well, then you're more of a photographer, then you're more of a cinematographer and a director of photography, a lighting artist, someone who's putting lights into the room and thinking about the camera movement, the blocking, and all those kinds of questions. And so, for each of us, just deciding what kind of work you want to do, and then whether you're going to go out and really acquire a bunch of deep modeling expertise, or if you're going to focus more on photography, lighting, and then just go source elements. Just go to GrabCAD, go to Sketchfab, go to the Google 3D warehouse. Just grab a bunch of high poly models. Don't waste your time trying to model everything. Get that stuff in. Work on the photography, work on the cinematography, the camera movement, the direction, the quality of the renders, the textures, the substances, and textures. There's so many free textures as well. So it's like everything else, so much dependent on the kind of work you want to do. And this is how I just try to explain to people the kind of basic lanes within 3D and the things that you need to focus on, right? If you want to be like Paul and really art direct everything, then it's actually more important that maybe you have some illustration chops and you can kind of draw up simple ideas and storyboard and then use that as reference. And then you need to go deep on hard surface modeling and even more organic modeling and just all the ways that you can make geometry from scratch, whether it's splines or box modeling. But if you want to build a portfolio like that, that's what you're going to have to focus on and learn. If you want to be creating hyper realistic stuff, well, then it's more important probably to be learning about advanced renderers like Octane and Redshift, and to be studying photography and lighting, and to be thinking about the way product photographers light their products. Because again, in the hyper real 3D lane, you are very often just replacing a photography studio environment, right? What could just be shot with a camera, but it's so much cheaper just to do it with 3D production. And so you got to study different things. And there's also the technical aspect of it, right? Doing this kind of work, so like looking at this food work over here, there's a lot of really, really high resolution textures in there, right? You could take one look at that image and really see into the detail of the elements, that these are probably 6K, 8K, maybe 4K resolution textures. All the objects are properly UV unwrapped. So whether you're going to do that through like a substance painter workflow, or whether you're just sourcing high quality objects that already have those textures, then it's really important to understand those workflows and get as comfortable as you can with creating good looking photography, because then that is kind of what separates even the kind of photo real stuff. And then, just because you're doing photo real, there's so much, there's so much possibility inside of that. I absolutely love this whole Mad Machines film that the Yeti folks did. Let's see if we can pull up some of these images here, where you can see they're using photoreal assets. They've sourced all these great looking icebergs and this teacup and this blender here. Like, it has a photoreal quality, but then they're adding a layer of surrealism by having all these little people in the giant teacup, which again just goes back to the importance of having a distilled idea, right? So like the idea and the subject matter, or the prompt or the vision, however you want to frame that, having that distilled idea and then just going out and sourcing all of the elements allows you to be really experimental and do work like this, right? Like all these models that we're looking at, you can definitely go get your hands on, probably for free. Maybe, you would have to pay for certain things, and if it's a client thing, then it's definitely okay to pay for stuff. But it just lets you get up and running, obviously, so much faster. And it's obviously just kind of a different approach, because then you just live with the models that you have. But given the ubiquity of 3D models and textures and rigs, there's really never been an easier time to get into this kind of photoreal 3D. It used to be much more difficult to create this kind of work. We didn't have all the cloud platforms with all the models and all the textures, and especially on the free side, there's just so many free resources. But again, it's like, there's no substitute for good composition, and there's no substitute for having a really clear, distilled idea. So that is, if you're a total beginner, and as I said at the beginning, I've been talking to so many 2D artists that want to get into 3D. They want to understand what are the steps that they should take to get into 3D. This is my, quick spiel overview of really how I see 3D production, and then you can kind of figure out where you fit into this and what kind of work you want to be doing and the things that speak to you. And the amazing thing about 3D is it's just totally 100% open. It goes across styles, across genres. It's just completely open, because everything you create is totally up to you. Like, what a great example of using a more graphic design driven approach, right? We're just looking here at, circles kind of going out, circles, dots, squares, lines. Like, these are basically graphic design frames. And then here we see the typography, the text for the kind of logo intro. But right, like that's a totally interesting approach as well. And this would fall into that kind of making everything category. And you can see the simplicity that you want to lean into when you're creating everything. But again, it's so open, and the possibilities are endless, and that's what can be intimidating for people at first, but also exciting, at the same time. And portfolios like Tom, the interesting thing about the people doing photo real 3D is their ability to kind of push what exists in reality, right? Like there's like certain simulations and things that you can do in 3D that just wouldn't be possible to capture in the real world. And so it really opens this door, and we've seen an entire genre be born of kind of photoreal abstract 3D, people using the simulation tools within Cinema 4D, going even further, using tools like Houdini to create even more advanced simulations. And so that kind of work is technically expensive to do, because, as we say, if we're using really bulky textures and in polygonal models, really high poly count stuff, that stuff's expensive to make because it requires a ton of rendering power. And that's, so when I say expensive, I'm in terms of computer usage. So if you're just at home, on your laptop or on a simple desktop, it's going to be really hard to do a bunch of advanced simulation and a bunch of crazy refined texture work. So this can also frustrate people when they get into 3D and they want to do the photoreal stuff and they say, yes, I want to do photoreal and simulation and make it look like the best thing you've ever seen. Well, that stuff's really, really expensive. And so if you can afford a machine or you can afford to send your stuff to a render farm, which can be expensive as well, then that stuff is open. But for a lot of people, they start here. They start with learning to model, learning to make things, because this kind of stuff is cheap on the CPU and the GPU, right? This stuff will render way, way faster, right? These are just colors and shapes, and these are low polygon kind of models in comparison. So that is the kind of technical constraint that can frustrate people as well. I would only say if you really just love the photoreal stuff and that's where you want to go, I would just go that direction. And maybe you're not going to be rendering 10-minute long films of photoreal stuff, but maybe you can render 3-second samples, 5-second samples of really nice looking shots. You can, that might even take a few days to render or whatever it is. But if you really love the photoreal stuff, I wouldn't run away from it just because of the technical constraints. I would just study photography and then get comfortable with the technical workflow of converting CAD models, using the various platforms that have terrain data and models, Google 3D Warehouse, all these places where you can just get free meshes to start with, or Turbo Squid, going and buying premium stuff too, especially if it's portfolio material. Then I would say definitely lean into that, because you want to feel good and excited about what you're creating, because whatever path you're going to go down with 3D, it's going to be time consuming to learn it no matter what happens. So that's my little presentation for today. Hopefully that will speak to somebody who's hanging out here or who checks this out later. We'll try to edit this down into a more useful clip. But yeah, Roj, thanks. In the new office. I'm in the new office today. I need to get some sound panels in here. I can hear the echo. I've just built a little backyard office, and this is one of my first days here in the office, so not much on the walls, but definitely a lot of work to do to get this place fixed up. But if anybody has any questions about MoGraph Mentor, I'm going to hang around for a few minutes here. Would love to answer any questions that you have. We've got a bunch of 3D training on our website. We now offer a subscription pricing. We sell courses individually at a higher price, and then we have a $29 a month on the annual plan to just get everything. So, you could pay $30 and check out the classes, see how much you could learn in 30 days, or buy a course if that makes sense. We've also got some free stuff, some free textures, some free rigs, whether you're, we got a couple C4D rigs, and then a Blender rig you can play around with as well, and then tutorials on the blog as well. But our position is like, you definitely need to learn what makes sense for your portfolio. And so we've always been really about the mentorships and just trying to figure out what it is you should study, because it's very different for everyone. Motion graphics is a very broad term. It's a very multidisciplinary industry. I'm not, people say the term generalist. I'm not sure that's even that true, right? Like, even people who are called generalists still do a really specific set of things typically. And when it comes to 3D and in a studio environment, everybody's got things that they're bringing. And so all that to say, don't feel overwhelmed. You don't know how to do everything. It's definitely a good idea to find your strengths within this field if you're trying to get into 3D, whether it's character modeling and rigging, general 3D motion graphics, stylized, cute modeling, box modeling techniques, more abstract kind of motion design stuff, or more advanced, photoreal stuff like we're talking about, learning to use Substance Painter, learning to use Octane, elevating your art direction and your ability to do style frames. And so, right, UV unwrapping, all these different things, general production techniques. So our goal is really just to create stuff that's helpful to people, trying to make it as cheap and flexible as possible. But ideally, we're here to try to use these mentorships to help artists get better. It's a hard industry to work in. It's a lot of work, if you're in this industry, and I'm preaching to the choir. But I think all of us just want to get better, and so we're trying to be part of that as well. So I'm going to hang out every Wednesday, do office hours. Happy to answer any questions that you might have, and talk about more topics. Last week on the stream, talked a little bit about 3D character animation. We are planning a Cinema 4D character animation introductory video course that should be out relatively soon. So hopefully that will be helpful. So Roj here in the chat says, can you record a MoGraph Mentor course that focuses on animation? So we do have an animation course. We have an intro to animation and After Effects, which is a mentorship, but it is also now a video course. If you sign up for the $29 a month all access, you get full access to all of that animation training. It's definitely good to learn those animation principles. The thing about learning animation, it's like, learn animation principles. You can take our Motion Design 101, get that information for free, Google it, get that information for free. Character animation is definitely a specific skill set, and 3D character animation in Cinema 4D, there's certainly some technical things to know and ways that you can get better with the dope sheet and the F-curves, and once you understand those basics, trying to speed up your workflow and all those things. But it definitely is, it all comes back to animation principles, right? There's never any way around, timing, spacing, overlap, overshoot, all those good things. And character animation's really hard. It's mostly muscle memory. But yeah, lots more training to come. If the mentorships are ever a good fit, we'd love to see you in one of the mentorships, because we think it's definitely kind of a helpful way to just refine your artistic sensibilities. If you're a beginner, I definitely don't recommend taking the mentorships necessarily. Just get your feet wet with free information, all that kind of thing. So Roj, we do have one piece of training in production with Reese Parker, who does really, really nice Adobe Animate, Photoshop, After Effects, hand-drawn traditional animation. So I think that's going to be a really helpful one as well. And then, yeah, some more After Effects training would be good as well. So does anybody have any questions about MoGraph Mentor? And if you ever think of something, feel free to reach out, hello@mographmentor.com. But I think we're probably going to leave it there for today. We'll go ahead and edit down the first part of this into a more useful clip talking about the stages of production and the different types of 3D production. So that's on the YouTube channel, and that can be a useful resource. But we will see you all next Wednesday. Come hang out with us a week from today. Every Wednesday at noon, going to be hanging out, drawing, painting, animating, 3D, 2D, all that good stuff. Hope you all have a great week. Whatever you're working on, keep going. Try to get out, get some sunshine, stretch the legs, all that good stuff. But if you were hanging out today, I do appreciate it, and we will see you next week. Thanks, everybody.